The apartment is silent, but the scene is anything but still. Blood splatters across white wallpaper. A woman lies motionless on the floor, positioned almost ritualistically, her arms bent at unnatural angles. Furniture is untouched. No signs of robbery. Nothing stolen. The killer didn't run. He staged this. Two detectives stand frozen, scanning the body in the room. Then one of them leans in and says, "He's done this before." But how? How can anyone determine who a killer is without knowing who they are? Timeline: the birth of profiling. Criminal profiling began with a question. Can we predict behavior from a crime scene? It wasn't always a science. Long before forensic labs and DNA testing, detectives had to rely on instinct, guesswork, and luck. But in 1957, something changed. A psychiatrist named Dr. James Brussel was called in by the New York Police Department. They had been tracking a bomber, nicknamed the Mad Bomber, for 16 years. Dozens of bombs left in public spaces. No fingerprints, no witnesses. Brussel examined the crime scenes and the bomber's letters. He observed the careful placement of the bombs, wrapped neatly in packages. The language in the letters was formal, filled with peculiar complaints about the system and injustice. The devices were constructed with meticulous precision. From this, Brussel concluded, the bomber was likely a man, middle-aged, paranoid but educated, living with a conservative mindset, single, living with a relative. And then he made one prediction that would go down in history. When you arrest him, he'll be wearing a double-breasted suit, buttoned. 3 days later, when police knocked on the door of George Metesky, every detail matched. And when he was taken into custody, he walked out in a double-breasted suit, fully buttoned. Profiling had begun. Investigation: the method behind the mind. Today, criminal profiling isn't guesswork. It's a methodical tool, a fusion of psychology, forensics, crime scene analysis, and behavioral science. The FBI formalized it in the 1970s. Agents like John Douglas and Robert Ressler interviewed dozens of serial killers: Ted Bundy, Charles Manson, John Wayne Gacy. They asked about childhood, fantasies, fears, not just what they did, but why. This gave birth to two key concepts. 1. Organized versus disorganized killers. Organized killers plan their crimes meticulously. They stalk victims, bring tools, forensically clean the scene. They're often intelligent, charming even. Disorganized killers act on impulse. They leave chaotic scenes full of evidence, often socially isolated, emotionally unstable. Observing a scene can instantly place a suspect in one category, already narrowing the suspect pool. 2. Crime scene signatures. Every killer has a signature, something they do not as a necessity, but as a psychological need. It might be a specific type of victim, a staged body, a personal object taken, a message written. These aren't random. They are patterns tied to compulsion. Once identified, they can link multiple crimes, even across states, long before police connect them in databases. Modern profiling. Clues that speak. Let's revisit the opening crime scene. The woman's limbs are positioned with deliberate precision. No sexual assault, nothing stolen, no forced entry. This suggests a controlled offender, possibly someone the victim knew, someone confident, maybe even emotionally detached. Next, blood patterns show the attack wasn't frenzied. The wound is single, precise, a knife, sharp, narrow. That means the killer brought the weapon. He planned this, possibly familiar with anatomy or medical procedures. Then there's the staging, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to. That's signature. Investigators create a profile. Male, 25 to 35, intelligent, possibly works in a profession involving tools or procedure. Socially adept, lives alone, keeps emotional distance, has a need for control, for power. Now they compare this to people in the victim's life, and that's when the suspect list gets very small. Aftermath, what we learned from the minds of killers. Profiling isn't perfect. It doesn't give you a name, but it gives you a psychological blueprint. It turns anyone into one of these three people. It helped catch the BTK killer, Dennis Rader, years after disappearing. It connected the dots between Jack the Ripper's victims, showing a pattern of misogynistic rage. It got inside Ted Bundy's mind, allowing FBI profilers to predict where he'd strike next. Psychologists noticed one recurring factor among many violent offenders: fantasy. Serial predators don't snap, they evolve. They fantasize for months, even years, until fantasy isn't enough. Their crimes become rehearsals of an internal theater, acted out on real victims. Profilers learn to read that fantasy. They look for the emotion behind the crime. Is it anger, revenge, power, lust? Because motive isn't always about money, jealousy, or revenge. Sometimes it's about control. And that's why profiling is so powerful. It turns invisible motives into visible patterns. Closure, the disturbing truth behind the practice. Criminal profiling has helped close countless cases, but it's not magic, it's a tool. And like any tool, it depends on the hands that use it. Some critics warn of tunnel vision, of seeing a profile instead of evidence. Others say too much reliance on psychology can blur objectivity. But one thing is undeniable. Profiling lets us stare into the abyss, not just to identify the monsters hiding in it, but to understand why they're there. And maybe, just maybe, to stop the next one, before the fantasy turns into bloodshed.